I'm Maria Bartiromo.
I'm Greg Gutfeld.
I'm Liz Clayman, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Wednesday, July 21st, 2021. I'm Dave Anthony. There's a key vote in the Senate today to move forward on a massive infrastructure rebuild plan. What if it fails and the bill stalls?
What Democrats could conceivably do is weaponize this against Republicans if they vote against ending the filibuster and say, oh, you see, we told you that they weren't interested in bipartisanship to start with.
I'm Lisa Brady. The mask debate comes roaring back as the Delta variant fuels a COVID comeback.
I do believe that if you're vaccinated, you should not need to wear a mask. And if you're unvaccinated, you're making that decision on your own. You should wear a mask if you're unvaccinated.
And I'm Jimmy Fallon. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
It's called a cloture vote, and in the Senate, it's important. The one scheduled today would advance $1 trillion infrastructure rebuild plan.
If you're serious about getting a bipartisan bill done, there's no good reason not to support starting the process now.
Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says it's not like this is the final bill.
There'll be no doubt many senators would want to offer additional items from the bipartisan framework or other issues, from transit to broadband to resiliency and more.
Schumer also wants Democrats by today to unify behind another plan they call human infrastructure, worth $3.5 trillion, which no Republican supports.
This bill is going to be a massive tax increase on business, and it's going to expand the size and role of government.
Democrats can pass it using a budget process the GOP can't block, but Senator Lindsey Graham tells Fox,
you're going to have inflation through the roof, and if they put legalizing illegal immigrants in that bill, you're going to have a complete run on the border. So I'd do anything I could to stop that.
Again, that is separate. The vote today is just on that bipartisan infrastructure plan.
There's a filibuster against even starting the bill, and you need to get 60 votes.
Chad Pergram is a Fox News congressional correspondent.
The issue here is that, Republicans have said since last week and certainly over the weekend, the bill isn't quite done yet. We've been meeting. We've been working around the clock, 24/7, deep into the night. We're getting there. Maybe just put this off a bit. And Chuck Schumer heretofore has been unwilling to do so.
Well, he has said, look, we don't have to have all the final details of the bill worked out. We're just getting the ball rolling with this vote, essentially.
That's right. And it's not that big a surprise that you have from time to time in the Senate votes on procedural matters when a bill isn't quite finished or every T isn't crossed and I dotted. That's not that rare. And that's the case that Chuck Schumer has been making. Although, if you were to look at this from the Republican perspective, you could say this is a way to undercut this bipartisan effort. We've worked for a long time. Democrats want to do their big $3.5 trillion bill anyway by themselves, if they can all stick together, and that remains to be seen. And then what Democrats could conceivably do is weaponize this against Republicans if they vote against ending the filibuster and say, oh, you see, we told you that they weren't interested in bipartisanship to start with, and they couldn't even get 10 Republicans to vote yes just to start debate on the bill. That would be the argument, and a lot of people think that that's really what the inner politics are going on here.
All right. Do they have 10 Republicans in that? They do in that bipartisan group, right? They do have 10.
They do, right? But again, if you talk to Bill Cassidy, Republican senator from Louisiana, who's been very involved in this process, who says, if you're setting yourself up for program failure, is what he said. And I threw this Democratic argument at him that maybe they were laying a trap for the Republicans. And he said, well, a cynic might say that. He said, I prefer not to think that that's what's going on here. But it's just not him. It's also Susan Collins from Maine, Republican. They're all saying there's a way maybe to hold the phone on this.
That $3.5 trillion separate plan, where are we on that?
Well, that bill isn't written either. And the reason I say it remains to be seen whether or not Democrats can all get on the same page, you had the DACA ruling by the judge a couple of days ago. So Democrats are now saying, let's put DACA somehow in this, or immigration reform in this, or voting rights in this. I mean, this thing is loaded up. The term of art here on Capitol Hill is like a Christmas tree, and it's only July, Dave. And so to get that balance just right of the Democrats, if you're going to do this by yourself, get that vote mixture just right is very, very hard, especially when you have moderate Democrats who generally are for infrastructure, but they are skeptical of the price tag. They're worried about the actual, maybe putting in dental or vision care for this, which is going to get very expensive if you put that into federal health programs, which is something they've talked about in this bill. And you have Pramila Jayapal, the chair of the Progressive Caucus in the House of Representatives, Congresswoman from Washington State, who says this is just a down payment. We want more. Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, saying that the bill isn't maybe as green as she would like it to be. So how you do this with a 4 or 5 vote margin in the House and virtually no room for error in the Senate remains to be seen. And that's why we're probably going to be here all the way through the fall.
All right. What is human infrastructure, as they've labeled the $3.5 trillion? What is this money actually going to go to? $3.5 trillion. You talked about dental. You talked about vision for health. What else is?
They've talked about child care. They've talked about child care. Did they put something related to immigration or DACA in this? That is all in the eye of the beholder. But it's a lot of things that don't have to do with roads and bridges. Is the short answer. Anything that deals with jobs and health and so on.
And climate change. What about climate change? I know that's part of this.
Something they've talked about is this climate core. This is another way to address that. What are the incentives in the bill that deal with green energy tax credits, or incentives for electric vehicles or solar and wind power? There's a plethora of provisions in that deal with, this is not going to be Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's Green New Deal, but a lot of those thematics would probably be in this bill, certainly in the area of tax credits, or maybe, moving government-related programs to be fueled by green energy or something of that nature.
We have the same names that we've talked about before, like Joe Manchin, Kirsten Sinema, as potential Democrats who might be worried about the size of the spending of that bill. What's the leadership doing about those senators?
Well, they're trying to figure out, again, what that balance is. Joe Manchin will play a lot of, a lot of cards are on the table for Joe Manchin. So that's pretty important. And, what we've seen from him before is he usually holds out to the last minute and then gets something that he wants. Again, he's a moderate Democrat, and gets something that's specific to West Virginia. And so everybody is kind of, looking at Joe Manchin. But because the vote matrix is so tight on this, everybody is essentially Joe Manchin in both the House and Senate, because all you need to do is hold out for your thing, whatever your thing is. And maybe that's going to influence whether or not they have the right votes to pass this bill in the House or the Senate.
51 Democratic lawmakers from Texas remain in the Washington, D.C. area, and several now have COVID after fleeing the state to block a Republican election reform bill they claim would suppress minority voting.
I am an American, and I want to vote without somebody infringing upon my rights and the rights of my constituents. And I stand and fight in today for it. I stand and fight for it until I can't fight no more.
State Rep Senfronia Thompson and the rest plan to stay away till the special session ends next month. But Republican Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who says the bill expands and secures voting, says he'll just call another session. So GOP State Senator Angela Paxton tells Fox,
their families are here. Their jobs are here. And this is their job. I mean, at a certain point, I think the case will be made that they've vacated their elected positions if they don't come back.
All that as Democrat-led voting reform remains stalled in Congress. Republicans blocked it as federal overreach.
We're back to Joe Manchin again, because you had the Texas Democrats meeting with him last week. He said, we're not going to talk about changing the filibuster, the other provision, because they're like, OK, we have to change the filibuster as well in the Senate, lower the threshold there from 60 votes to 51 votes, like they do for executive branch nominations and also judges on the Supreme Court, justices on the Supreme Court. So the term of art you hear around Capitol Hill is a carve out. The idea that you can filibuster any other type of bill. The problem with that is if you crack the door open on that day, you're going to have every Tom, Dick, or Harry lined up at Chuck Schumer's office saying, oh, but what about my bill, Mr. Leader? What about my bill? Can't we do a carve out on that?
Okay.
And, I could see where the pro-D.C. statehood or Puerto Rico statehood people said, well, there's nothing more important than preserving voting rights or getting votes for people who are unrepresented in Congress, Again, where does it stop? That is the classic Pandora's box.
Right, but the Senate makes that determination. I keep hearing people saying, hey, President Biden's got to get rid of the filibuster, but this is the Senate's decision, right?
Right, but the question is, does he apply pressure? And this is where maybe, let's bring this full circle back to infrastructure. where maybe this bill blows up, the bipartisan bill, because it does not get 60 votes to cut off a filibuster against just getting onto the bill. And, millimeter by millimeter, they're starting to say, you see, Joe Manchin, you see, Kyrsten Sinema, this is why we need to get rid of the filibuster, because we can't get these things done. And maybe over time, those issues start to ripen. The other thing that happens is that some people make the point that if you do get rid of the filibuster and you do pass these things, which remains to be seen, just if you were to get rid of the filibuster, and you have to have people like Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema willing to get rid of the filibuster, and heretofore they are not, then when the Republicans get control of the Senate, whenever that is, be it January of 2023 or down the road, they will undo all of these things. Because why? Democrats, then in the minority, cannot filibuster them. And so, caveat emptor, be careful of what you ask.
Yeah, but I mean, if you can get the law changed now, you can worry about that later, right?
Well, that is the Obamacare approach to legislating. They passed that in 2009 and 2010. Republicans have fought hammer and tong for 12 years to get that off the books, have never been successful. And Obamacare remains the law of the land. Richard Neal is the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, and there's been a lot of talk lately about this child tax credit that they've put on the books here and maybe making it permanent. It's just up for a short period of time. There is a sunset to it. And Neal said in relation to that, he said, it's a lot easier to get something on than once it's on the books to take it off. So maybe that's the Democrats' approach. You get it on the books, whatever it is, and as you say, live to fight another day.
If the vote on Wednesday doesn't get to 60 and they can't get going, will they try again, or will this be something that Democrats use to make the case that they have to go on their own for everything infrastructure?
They certainly could. I mean, you got to remember there's an awful lot of kabuki theater going on right now in shadow boxing. Everybody's kind of daring one another, and Chuck Schumer, in addition to maybe saying, I can turn this around on the Republicans and say, you're not willing to be bipartisan, whereas Republicans probably say the same thing to Chuck Schumer, is that he knows that infrastructure, the brick and mortar infrastructure, girders and bridges and things, that's pretty popular with the public. And therefore, if they vote against that, that is a really tough vote for them to take. And our friends at the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, the DSCC, they're sitting about a block and a half from the Capitol. They're in charge of getting Democrats elected to the Senate. They're going to document that roll call vote on Wednesday. And they're going to turn it around and weaponize it against these Republicans who vote no on that procedural vote and say, can you believe that they voted against this? And you can see the ad that's running in October, 2022 right now with the eerie music. And you see the little script at the bottom of the screen that says roll call vote, blah, blah, blah. That's going to be that roll call vote because they will turn it against those Republicans.
But nothing on infrastructure, either one of these bills will pass anytime soon in final version, right?
No, we're probably on a fast track, we're probably at least 2 to 3 weeks away. And on a more moderate track, probably sometime in August, as I always say, beware the Ides of August. August is the craziest month always on Capitol Hill.
Chad Pergram, Fox News Congressional Correspondent. Always good to talk to you. Thanks, Chad.
Likewise.
This is Jimmy Fallon with your Fox News commentary coming up.
President Biden is beating a drum.
The safest thing to do is to get vaccinated. Get vaccinated.
Also urging Americans to stay vigilant amid another COVID surge, thanks largely to the Delta variant.
While COVID-19 cases are rising, virtually all of the COVID deaths and hospitalizations are from unvaccinated people.
On Tuesday, several breakthrough infections were confirmed among fully vaccinated staff, both at the White House and on Capitol Hill, including a senior aide to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. But the Capitol attending physician is not bringing back a mask mandate. Neither is the CDC, still saying fully vaccinated people don't need to wear masks, although federal health officials also say local rules should be followed, and those vary widely. raising many questions again. Texas Governor Greg Abbott tells Fox News.
With regard to schools in particular, listen, I've made it very clear. This is an issue of parental choice and will not be an issue of mandates.
This after the American Academy of Pediatrics recommended universal masking in schools for everyone over age 2. Like the White House, CDC Director Rochelle Walensky is emphasizing the effectiveness of vaccines as protection from the worst of COVID, even though there's still a small chance of getting it.
The best way to prevent the spread of COVID-19 variants is to prevent the spread of disease, and vaccination is the most powerful tool we have.
Dr. Walensky told a Senate panel on Tuesday that in just the past few weeks, the Delta variant has gone from an estimated half of genetically sequenced COVID cases in the U.S. to more than 80% of the cases.
I am not surprised by the breakthrough cases.
Dr. and retired Admiral Brett Giroir was an assistant health secretary under President Trump.
We know that the vaccines are highly effective, well over 90%. In fact, a study was just published 2 days ago among patients in the Veterans Administration here in the United States. And, you know, a lot of the veterans tend to be in poor health, but their vaccine effectiveness was 97%. 7 days after the second shot. So I'm not surprised by the breakthrough just because you do the percentages. There's always going to be a few percent of individuals that will get sick despite the high protection, but we still see enormous protection against hospitalization and death. So I think we expected this, and as more and more people get vaccinated, it's going to be more likely that the people who are in the hospital are vaccinated just because of the numbers.
Well, the spread of the Delta variant in particular has certainly brought the mask controversy roaring back again. We have LA County that's gone back to mandating them indoors for everyone. And former Surgeon General Dr. Jerome Adams, who you worked with on the Trump White House COVID team, is saying the CDC should update its mask guidance, at least in areas with rising numbers. Do you agree? Does it really depend on where you are and what the risk is in that place?
So I think I have a different take on that. I still believe that the CDC guidance is correct in that if you are fully vaccinated, you do not need to wear a mask in public, indoors, or outdoors. I believe that's correct guidance based on the science. I also believe it is correct that if you are not vaccinated, you really should wear a mask because it will provide some protection to you and certainly protection against you spreading the virus to other people. The Delta variant is very infectious. It's probably no more dangerous than the normal coronavirus that we've all been working with for the past 15 months, but it is clearly more infectious. In terms of local mask mandates, the CDC and the administration said it's up to the localities, and it is. I find that very strange. When we were in the Trump administration, we were chastised every day for not having national mandates and forcing people to do X, Y, or Z. But you see that the Biden administration is doing the same thing because public health is really a state and local kind of event that should be done locally. That being said, I don't think mask mandates are the appropriate way to go. I do believe that if you're vaccinated, you should not need to wear a mask. And if you're unvaccinated, you're making that decision on your own. You should wear a mask if you're unvaccinated. And the third component that seems to have disappeared completely is the idea of testing. I was the testing czar, and there was not a day in the White House that the administration did not get beaten up because everyone wanted more testing. And again, we developed hundreds of millions of tests per month, but you're not hearing anything about testing. If I were the Biden administration in these areas of outbreak, I would be sending home tests to everyone there so they could test themselves. This is a drop in the bucket in terms of money and can provide a lot of protection.
What about a place like a school building where you have people of different ages, some who are not eligible for vaccines yet, in very close quarters? And I ask this because you've got the American Academy of Pediatrics now recommending universal masking in schools for this fall for children as young as 2. Why not be that cautious in a setting like that?
I think for children 12 or over who've been vaccinated, the CDC is correct. There is no need for a child who's been vaccinated to even contemplate wearing a mask because they are protected, highly protected, given their young immune systems and robust responses. So I think the AAP is wrong. If you're vaccinated, you shouldn't wear a mask. I personally have issues with the data on children under 5 years of age. Even, it's very strange, the AAP cites how good the World Health Organization and some of the UN organizations, and we need to follow them because that shows how kids could be safe. But in the exact material that the AAP cites, it basically says, do not wear a mask if you're under 5, that it will interfere with their social and development, social skills and development, and will cause more harm than good. And for children 6 to 11, you have to really be careful and only use it in select circumstances. So, this is not an obvious issue. To me, under 5, there's no data that masks actually help. And we know that the risks to children are incredibly, incredibly small. For 6 to 11, I think it's sort of up to the individual school districts in understanding what the spread is like. But I think there needs to be an affirmative reason to wear a mask as opposed to just doing it because it seems like the right thing to do without data. And I'll just make one point. If you look at school outbreaks, the majority of them were caused by teachers coming into the school and spreading it to other staff. It's not caused by children coming in and spreading it to other children or to teachers. So if anything, we need to make sure all our teachers are vaccinated. And if they choose not to get vaccinated, I think that needs to be looked at pretty hard in terms of their risk of spreading the disease to children.
The White House has blamed at least some of the vaccine hesitancy on COVID and vaccine misinformation. I know you don't necessarily agree that that's the problem, but why not? And what is the problem?
So I have real concerns. Vaccine misinformation has been out there for a long time, and it's something I tried to deal with as the Assistant Secretary for Health and the head of the National Vaccine Program, actually. So it is real. I put these into a couple of categories. We know that there are Russian and Chinese misinformation campaigns that are spread over the internet in order to create discontent within the United States. We know who those people are and where they come from, and we need to do everything possible to eliminate them from the web. But I do have concerns about the U.S. government telling private companies what is correct and what is incorrect information. I do believe that censorship, that's sort of the definition of violation of rights to free speech by the government. And I sign up for Justice Brandeis. That is, the remedy here is more speech and not enforced silence.
While the U.S. and other parts of the world deal with COVID's latest stand, the question of how it all started remains unanswered, with more attention now on the lab that was studying these types of viruses in Wuhan, China, which became the epicenter of the pandemic.
Dr. Fauci, knowing that it is a crime to lie to Congress, do you wish to retract your statement of May 11th where you claimed that the NIH never funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan?
At the Senate hearing on Tuesday, Kentucky Republican Senator and Dr. Rand Paul grilled Dr. Anthony Fauci once again about funding from the National Institutes of Health. And Dr. Fauci pushed back harder this time.
You increased its transmissibility to humans.
Right.
You're saying that's not gain-of-function?
Yeah, that is correct. And Senator Paul, you do not know what you are talking about.
Though the NIH director, Dr. Francis Collins, has offered more nuanced answers before, acknowledging it's possible funding could have been used that way without authorization. But should that question be part of the search for answers about COVID?
So I think they're related, but they're two separate questions. One is, what is the origin? And, I've testified and I've said publicly that I think the evidence right now is pointing to a lab leak from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And there's so many lines of evidence, both the lack of this virus being in nature and nothing being close to it, as well as all the types of research that was going on there at Wuhan Institute of Virology, the intelligence reports showing lab workers becoming sick. the fact that it was perfectly or near perfectly transmittable to humans from day one. Viruses that develop in nature and come from animals don't do that. And I think that was compelling for Dr. Redfield in his expert opinion that it became from the lab. So that's the origin issue. The second issue was whether the NIH funded the research. And whether they funded the research directly or indirectly, NIH money was going to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. It was going through the EcoHealth Alliance. It wasn't a large amount of money, but it was there. But I do think it's a tip of the iceberg problem. How much money from the NIH is funding laboratories that engage in potentially dangerous research around the world? We need to know that. What is the review process for gain of function, or what I would call gain of opportunity research? I think these types of questions are certainly related to origins, but whether or not the NIH funded the research that led to this pandemic does not detract from the overall question about how do we monitor and how do we control and provide accountability for potentially dangerous research, particularly in foreign countries. I am much less concerned about the United States and their research infrastructure here because we're transparent. There are multiple levels of controls. People have freedom to speak. But in a repressive regime like China, you really don't know what's going on there. And I do believe scientists are threatened with their lives or their freedom in order to toe the party line. So we really need new levels of accountability and control. And I encourage, in a bipartisan fashion, that Congress investigates this and sets up standards for the future.
Admiral Brett Giroir, as always, we thank you very, very much for your time.
It's always a pleasure to be on. And again, I think your show does a great service to America by letting us explore the issues a little more in depth so that people can get the right information and make good decisions for themselves and their family. So I truly thank you for your interest and your always great questions.
From the Fox News Podcasts Network. Subscribe and listen to the Trey Gowdy Podcast. Former federal prosecutor and four-term U.S. Congressman from South Carolina brings you a one-of-a-kind podcast. Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com.
It's time for your Fox News commentary.
Jimmy Fallon.
What's on your mind?
So Prince Harry announced that he's releasing a memoir about leaving the royal family. If this matters to you, doctors urge you to seek help immediately. I mean, seriously. Haven't we heard enough from this whiny, woe is me, know nothing? Sure, the guy might have been a member of the royals, but he was like 12th in line to the crown. The only way Harry gets to be the king is if he plays a game of chess. And that's assuming he could stop being a pawn for his fame-hungry wife. The ex-Prince of Bel-Air is reportedly making $20 million, which works out to $1 for every time he and Meghan claim they just wanted their privacy. Because I know when I want to be left alone, I start a podcast, do a Netflix series, sit down for an Oprah interview, and then write a book about the whole thing. Seriously, you two don't need a book deal, you need a mirror. Earth to Harry and Meghan. Nobody wants to hear how hard life is as a member of the royal family because it's still way easier than everyone else's. But these two bozos keep playing the victim card because on some level they actually feel sorry for themselves. Yeah, Harry and Meghan might be the biggest frauds of all time, but at this point they're only fooling themselves. I'm Jimmy Fallon.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. Stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com. Fox Nation presents podcasts Women of the Bible Speak.
I'm Shannon Bream, host of Fox News at Night and author of the new book, Women of the Bible Speak, the wisdom of 16 women and their lessons for today. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, foxnewspodcast.com, or wherever you download your podcasts.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust. And click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.